Magandang umaga po sa ating lahat. Maraming salamat sa pagkakataong makibahagi sa inyong programa. Today is the 54th celebration of International Literacy Day, which was first held in 1967. The times were calling for the world to pay attention to literacy. Millions of people were unable to read, write, and compute. In 2021, the challenges we face are similar. Over 773 million children and adults all over the world have very limited literacy skills. This has been exacerbated by two drivers: the COVID-19 pandemic, and second, technologies. In fora such as this, we will discuss these two dynamic drivers and how they can be addressed so that we can empower people with literacy and recovery. Thank you to the Philippine Normal University, led by Dr. Bert Tuga, for putting emphasis on every person's right to literacy and to a future which should evolve with the same intelligence, speed, and tenacity as the novel coronavirus of 2019 that continues to threaten us all. Three questions organize this talk. The first is, what has been the impact of COVID-19 on workers and learners? What are the principles of human-centered recovery? And how can we narrow the digital divide through multiliteracies and social justice? Let me address the first question. We all feel and witness the impact of COVID-19 in our lives and in those that we love. But if there is one glaring truth which this pandemic has unveiled for us, it is that pre-existing inequalities in society are everywhere. And those who are most vulnerable suffer the impact of COVID-19 the most. These repercussions have been magnified in the lives of poor, underrepresented, marginalized people. Globally, those who are in informal employment have no safety nets such as health and social services. Employment is down and hugely curtailed. And in 2017, 53.6% of people around the world did not have access to adequate digital technologies. The most affected are the elderly, the unemployed, those with special needs, and those who are poorly educated or economically disadvantaged. The OECD also shows us that in categories of low skill, medium skill, high skill jobs, there's always a difference in the way people are able to adapt to the pressures of the pandemic. So the less educated or the less technical one's job is, the harder it is to adjust to new employment opportunities, to the new demands of work from home or remote learning or remote selling. And all of these things are very, very important, because if people cannot change the way they work, then there won't be income streams for their families. In the Philippines, businesses were also affected direly. For example, by the middle of 2020, companies were already asking for governmental intervention so that they could stay afloat. Of late, we have heard devastating news of companies going to receivership, including our very own carrier, the Philippine Airlines. But what pains us the most is the impact on individuals and the poorest of sectors. COVID-19 stopped income streams and the execution of work for most people. The gains that we made in employment over decades of hard work suddenly went poofed. In 2020, in April of 2020, our unemployment rate rose so high that it was impossible for the economy to catch up that quickly. Indeed, the disastrous effects of the pandemic turned workers' lives upside down. Those who thrived economically were those who had skills that were most needed, such as in the food sector, for deliveries, or for supply chain workers. People had to switch gears and find ways to earn using relevant skills they possessed so that they could become financially viable. OECD found that low-skilled adults were less likely to recognize that they needed to reskill or use different skill sets. Those with higher skills or better education were more adaptable. Therefore, today, more than any day of the year, it is important for us to recognize that there is a huge cohort of adults and youth who need literacy and digital skills, upskilling, and retraining to be able to be productive once again. In terms of education and the impact of COVID-19 on learners, we know that this is a major concern in the Philippines. Alarms for learning loss has been reported all over the world. 54% less contact time with teachers is already happening. In the Philippines, we've been keeping children out of school for over a year now. We know that previous studies during natural disasters showed that for every month of contact time lost, children suffer social disconnection, a feeling of unable to play, the delay in the return to normalcy, so to speak, or business as usual, actually produces learning delay. We need to be able to address this immediately. Our schools went from this scenario to this one, and now we find ourselves with these. Teachers, parents, and children reaching out to each other through technologies and print modules so that they can continue to teach and learn. The birth and rebirth of flexible learning interventions have bridged distances and have made new connections between teaching and learning, students and mentors, children and their peers, and family members. We need to hone these processes because we need to know if children are learning using these processes. The second item to discuss is human-centered recovery. These are the phases of recovery. When a disaster strikes, there is immediate response and short-term intervention, and we call this relief or first aid or psychological first aid. Phase 2 is recovery and reconstruction, which is what we are discussing. And hopefully it will lead to programs that will help transition to either business as usual, what it was before, or to a new normal. And finally, we want to build resilience in case another disaster comes. Human-centered development agenda was pushed by the International Labor Organization, so that we invest in people, we invest in institutions that protect workers, and therefore make sure that there is social protection and social dialogue for everyone. And there is work for all people, including those who are disabled and those who are marginalized. In 2021, the ILO reiterated its call for sustainable, inclusive, and resilient human-centered recovery. I'm going to be reading a few principles about human centered recovery, and I would like you to think about these statements and assess the interventions you are doing in your schools or education communities and see if they are consistent with these principles. Let me just read a few in the interest of time. Number one, understand and care about the human experience, especially during the pandemic. Did you put people first? Second, did you prepare for future disruptions? Are we ready with possibilities for another lockdown? Or are we ready for possibilities for blended learning? And finally, have we been able to provide information about emerging roles or jobs that we can grow into so that we can train ourselves for these upcoming roles? I hope that you've been thinking about your interventions, and maybe you can type those up in the chat and say why you feel they are human-centered recovery actions. The third item in our discussion today has to do with narrowing the digital divide through multiliteracies and social justice. Digital skills are broadly understood as a range of abilities that use devices, communication applications, and networks to access, manage, understand, integrate, and create information. These skills are subsumed in terms that are in different terms. For example, new literacies, digital literacies, and multiliteracies, which is the one I prefer to use. To narrow the digital divide, it is important that we grapple and come to terms with the changing and evolving definition of literacy. Because literacy will have to change because of new platforms, technologies, and because people have different purposes for using literacy. Various aspects of digital skills are increasingly becoming indispensable to become literate. For example, it is not enough to just to be able to read, write, listen, and speak. We need to be able to view because icons are everywhere. Most importantly is we must put emphasis on meaning making because we need to make sure that all of these things that are perceived actually become comprehensible and connect to the lives and ideas of people. We can do all of these using print material, but with the emergence and the pressure from technology, literacy is now forming another two other core skills, which would be technology use and creativity. If we do not strengthen literacy so that it comprises of all of these 8 skills, multiliteracy development, as well as the development of a powerful mind, will be compromised. Those who are in the business of trolling and fake news creation only require one type of customer for their business to thrive. They need a customer whose mind does not think twice or does not exercise any critical thinking. Without core literacy skills, people can get manipulated, democracies can fall, and truth will be warped. To narrow the divide, we need to acknowledge the perpetually changing nature of literacy and the need for all of the 8 core skills to be developed in learners, whether young or old. Shown in the previous slides were those 8 core skills, and these 8 core skills must now be applied on different contexts such as financial literacy, media literacy, ecological literacy, and the most crucial of all during our times now, civic literacy and health literacy. The ILO said we need to invest in people to help them recover from the impact of the pandemic. It identified four key strategies: lifelong learning for all, which we've been saying for decades, and supporting people through transitions, as I had explained earlier. But two other strategies are pushed forward so that we can maintain a transformative agenda for gender equality and to strengthen social protection, because these two emphasize social justice. These two must be palpable in programs and interventions which turn global declarations into real actions that actually improve the lives of individuals and communities. Therefore, we must help workers transition to new roles by reskilling and upskilling. We need to understand their personal goals and help them find a place in the social and industry situation or context where they find themselves in or where they want to go. We need to put a safety net for them. Many of the workers now, including you and I, have worries. For example, are we going to be okay in the next year financially, economically? Are we going to be able to pay our bills? Are we lonely working from home? I miss my coworkers very much. I miss RAP and the people in the Reading Association of the Philippines. These are things that we need to be able to address so that we can lower the anxiety of people. But also, we have to admit that we have become callous to pre-existing inequalities around us, and therefore, now is the time for us to help each other cope, and we must help address inequalities. Government must spend, provide the tools needed, and be equitable, honest, inclusive in providing access to technologies. By this time, I think we all know that returning to purely face-to-face schooling will be a challenge. Therefore, how will we operationalize blended learning so that children can once again be with their peers and play? We could open up learning spaces. The Literacy Coordinating Council has awarded interventions that have done marvelously in promoting literacy at the barangay level. We should enable local solutions to counter the impact of a global virus on learning. So local solutions to a global problem. Provide communities with the means to implement good programs. Maybe you are thinking, these interventions, spending money, these are too expensive and the Philippines cannot afford it. But you know, Google attributes this quote to so many people, but I choose Barack Obama. If you think education is too expensive, you can try to estimate the cost of ignorance. So which way are we gonna go? We need to be human-centered, learner-centered, learning-centered, and therefore differentiated and personalized in instructing. We can use simple tools to find out what children need. And when we do know what they have and what they need, we can provide for each child's need or each learner's need specifically so that it's relevant to what they need. Personalized teaching and learning will be the way to go, even as we move towards blended learning. Differentiation means we cannot go back to normal anymore. Technology's been with us for so long, but it is only this pandemic that pushed us to use it for education in this magnitude. So we need to break down these challenges into solvable chunks. We need to embrace the new definition of literacy, which includes technology and creativity. And we need to prepare learners for all the multiliteracies they need so they can survive the world that is coming to them. We cannot go back to the normal anymore because that normal was the problem. We need a new world and therefore new strategies. And we need new teachers who can bring children forward, confident and powerful. Maraming salamat po.